No life vests, no engines, no heaters, only the roar of the sea, the sting of wind, and clothes soaked with salt. Yet medieval sailors, from Viking raiders in the north to Japanese, Arab, and Mediterranean traders, crossed oceans of ice and fire alike. To stay warm was not a matter of comfort but survival. Between wind and wave, warmth became an art, a fragile balance of body, craft, and faith against the endless cold. At sea, the cold was not just a feeling. It was a slow enemy that crept through wood, cloth, and bone. In the medieval world, temperatures on open waters could drop below freezing, especially in the North Atlantic or the winter seas of Japan. Wind whipped relentlessly across decks, and every wave brought another breath of icy mist. Salt water soaked everything: clothes, ropes, sails, turning each fibre into a frozen shroud. There was no concept of waterproofing, no oilskin or rubber coat. Once drenched, a man's clothing became a trap for cold air, and his body began to surrender heat faster than it could be made. A sailor's skin would blister from windburn, his fingers stiffen, his teeth chatter until exhaustion took over. To the untrained, such conditions meant death within hours, but to those who lived their lives upon the sea, cold was simply another element to endure, like hunger or fear. Medieval sailors learned to move constantly, to eat when they could, and to rest in groups, sharing warmth in silence. The sea showed no mercy, but it taught resilience, the art of surviving when everything around you seeks to take your warmth away. Wool was the gold of the sea. Among European sailors, it was prized not for its beauty but for its strange gift. It could stay warm even when soaked. A Viking sailor might wear several layers: a wool tunic close to the skin, another thicker one above, and an outer layer of leather sealed with wax or grease. In Japan, fishermen favoured hemp cloth, tightly woven, rough, and surprisingly durable. Over it they wore straw rain capes called mino, woven from rice stalks. Though primitive in appearance, the mino trapped air and diverted water, keeping the core warm even in storms. The secret was in the layers. Each one trapped a pocket of warmth and slowed the wind's bite. Across the seas, the logic was the same: insulation before dryness. Northern seafarers had a saying: wool saves the body, but straw saves the soul. It meant that while wool fought the cold outside, the simple, humble straw reminded men of land, harvest, and home. The warmth they carried within. Whether wrapped in wool or hemp, every sailor trusted his clothes like armour. Against the cold sea, they were not garments. They were the thin line between life and death. When the wind tore through the North Sea or the icy waters of the Baltic, the outermost layer of a sailor's clothing became his only shield. Leather, thick, heavy, and treated with animal fat, was the medieval answer to waterproofing. Seal skin, whale hide, or cow leather was rubbed with fish oil, beeswax, or tallow until it glistened, creating a natural barrier against the rain. Mediterranean sailors preferred different methods. They soaked coarse coats in pine resin, creating a stiff but water-resistant surface that smelled of forests and smoke. It wasn't comfortable, but it worked. Every sailor knew the stench of oil and wax that clung to his sleeves meant safety, a smell that could mean survival. In East Asia, Japanese and Korean fishermen brushed layers of sesame oil or beeswax over their garments, then dried them in the sun until they hardened slightly. These clothes were greasy, shiny, and heavy, but when the storm struck, the water rolled off like glass. The combination of leather, wax, and oil was more than protection. It was a ritual. Before voyages, men carefully polished their gear, knowing that every drop of fat might buy them one more night of warmth. The sea respected those who prepared well, and punished those who didn't. Fire and wood never mixed well. On a wooden ship, flame was both friend and curse. Open fires were forbidden, for one spark could turn a vessel into a floating pyre. Yet, without heat, frost and death crept silently. The Vikings found a balance. Small braziers filled with embers, shielded inside clay or iron bowls. They placed them in enclosed cabins or under awnings, where the glow gave just enough warmth to thaw stiff fingers. In the Arab world, sailors used similar brass containers, burning charcoal slowly to heat air in confined cabins. Across the seas of Asia, Japanese and Chinese sailors brought hibachi, small earthenware stoves filled with red coals. These humble furnaces warmed hands, reheated soup, and kept morale alive on freezing nights. The heat they produced was minimal, barely touching the air around them. But the psychological warmth was priceless. The faint crackle of ember, the smell of burning pine, and the orange light flickering on wood. It reminded sailors of hearths left behind, of homes that waited beyond the horizon. At sea, a single flame was hope itself, fragile, trembling, but alive. A sailor's stomach was his furnace. In the medieval world, warmth began from within, with whatever food and drink could be carried safely across the sea. Before departure, crews stocked their ships with salted meat, dried fish, thick porridge, and hard bread. These foods were dense, slow to rot, and heavy with salt to prevent spoilage. In northern Europe, mead and warm ale became a daily ritual. The sweetness of honey and the burn of alcohol spread quick heat through the body, if only for a moment. Some captains rationed spirits not for pleasure, but as medicine against despair and cold. Farther east, Arab sailors brewed spiced tea or milk infused with cardamom and cloves, while Japanese and Chinese crews relied on hot rice gruel, pickled vegetables, and salted rice balls. Warm food filled the air with steam, a reminder that life still pulsed beneath the chill. They believed that a full belly meant a strong heart. To eat was to resist the cold, to claim one more day against the sea's indifference. Around the ship's small fire or brazier, bowls were passed, stories shared, and for a brief while warmth became something communal, not from heat, but from human company. The sea's greatest cruelty was not its waves, but the wind that never ceased. Medieval sailors turned to whatever they had, cloth, straw, leather, to build barriers between themselves and the icy air. On Viking ships, animal hides were stretched across the deck to block spray. In Asia, fishermen layered straw mats or oiled cloths over sleeping spaces to keep them dry. Some ships even lined their cabins with bundles of reeds, creating makeshift insulation that trapped warmth from body heat. When sleeping, sailors avoided the bare planks of the ship. They lay atop straw bedding, or within thick canvas sacks to stay off the damp wood. Even a few inches of dry space could mean the difference between waking shivering and not waking at all. During storms, they wrapped themselves head to toe in straw capes or leather cloaks, leaving only a slit to breathe. These makeshift cocoons were suffocating but vital. Survival was not about comfort, it was about endurance. Medieval sailors did not fight the cold with advanced tools or clever inventions. They fought it with wisdom passed down through generations, with materials shaped by hand and experience. Against the sea's endless chill, knowledge itself was warmth. On the open sea, warmth often came not from fire or fabric, but from flesh and spirit. Medieval sailors understood that human closeness was the oldest and most reliable source of heat. When the cold bit deep, they huddled together under shared cloaks, sleeping side by side like stacked logs, their breath mingling in the darkness. Work itself became a form of survival. They sang while rowing, shouted against the wind, and moved constantly to keep blood flowing. The songs of the sea were not just for rhythm, they were spells against freezing, chants to remind the body it was still alive. In Japan, fishermen called this kokoro o atatameru, to warm the heart. They believed that the will to live could heat the body more surely than fire. Among Viking crews, camaraderie was sacred. No one slept alone unless he wished to die. Even small acts, passing a cup of warm drink, sharing dry rags, laughing through pain, built invisible walls against despair. For on a cold ship, isolation was more deadly than frost. The sea demanded unity. Together men became their own hearth, a living flame that could not be extinguished by the wind. Falling into cold seawater was a death sentence. In the medieval era, no lifelines, no rescue boats, no second chances existed. A man who fell overboard into near-freezing water could lose consciousness within minutes. Survival depended on instinct and speed. The first rule was to shed weight. Soaked leather and wool dragged a man down like stones. If he reached the ship again, crewmates wrapped him in dry cloth, straw, or anything that trapped air. Heat loss was slowed by rubbing limbs briskly, or by laying the victim between two warm bodies until his colour returned. Some ships carried warm corners, small compartments near the galley or brazier where men could change clothes and dry their hands. A few drops of hot broth or spiced wine revived the will to breathe, but the most important rule was prevention. Every sailor learned to avoid standing too near the edge during storms, and to secure themselves with ropes when waves rose high. They tied faith to skill, knowing the sea would show mercy to none. Keeping clothes dry, keeping the heart steady, those were the first laws of life at sea. In the frozen silence of the ocean, warmth began with vigilance. For medieval sailors, the cold ocean was not merely nature, it was divine judgment. Every culture gave it a spirit, a will, a personality that decided who would live and who would freeze beneath the waves. The Vikings prayed to Aegir, the sea god who brewed storms in his cauldron. Arab sailors whispered verses to Allah, asking for mercy on restless waters. Japanese seafarers bowed to the kami of waves and wind, believing warmth itself could be a blessing granted by unseen hands. Superstition was a kind of insulation for the soul. Sailors carried amulets woven from red wool or hemp cord, symbols of fire and life. Some tied small charms near the mast or oil lamps, tokens that represented the eternal flame of endurance. Before setting sail, crews often touched the ship's lantern, whispering vows to keep the inner fire burning until they returned to port. In the endless dark of sea nights, faith was warmth. The soft glow of an oil lamp on deck, trembling in the wind, was more than light. It was a sign that hope still lived. When all else froze, belief moved through the body like heat, unseen but powerful. To survive the cold, one needed more than clothing or food. One needed meaning. The belief that each breath defied the ocean's hunger. No one was truly warm on the medieval sea. They learned instead to coexist with the cold, to bend, endure, and survive within it. From Viking longships to Japanese fishing boats, from Arab dhows to Mediterranean galleys, every sailor depended on wool, straw, oil, and faith to protect the fragile spark of life. To stay warm was not a rebellion against nature, but an act of harmony, a quiet understanding that the sea would never change, yet man could adapt. Each voyage became a meditation on endurance. The cold stripped away all illusion, leaving only the raw truth. Survival required not comfort, but courage. In that frozen silence between stars and waves, warmth became a shared miracle, built from sweat, breath, and the will to live. The medieval sailor's greatest fire burned not in any brazier or lamp, but within his chest. Even in the face of the endless merciless sea, he carried a small, stubborn flame, proof that the human heart, though fragile, could outlast the cold.